and the electricians, pretending to be absorbed in his own ghastly preparations for sending down the lever which should force thousands of volts of electricity through his quivering body. Hello there, welcome to Headlines and Voices. This is the channel where we take articles from publications from across the United States that are a century or more old. And some of these things are just absolutely fascinating. This channel was inspired by a book I wrote called Virus 1918, where basically what we did is took a bunch of newspaper articles from the time of Spanish influenza and reproduced them in book form so people could go back and read. And it did so well, and it continues to sell on Amazon, that we decided to make a channel that would just be focused on old newspaper articles, because there's so many interesting things from newspapers from American history. So today's is from something called the Day Book. This was published in Chicago, and all the research I've done, I come across the Day Book a lot. And this was one of those publications that kind of focused on the sensational. In the writing kind of comes across that way itself, but all the stories that it gathered with, once again, those kind of over-the-top, sensational type stories. And this particular article is from July 6th, 1916, from the Day Book, and it's called Coningsby's Last Minute, and it's specifically related to an execution. And these are so fascinating, reading about the executions that took place and how they would report them in these publications back in the early 20th century. So, Coningsby's Last Minute. Hurt you? Not a bit. You won't feel anything. The ghastly irony of the words rang through Coningsby's brain. True, he would feel nothing, but it was not the physical pain he feared. It was the instantaneous flight of the soul, the terror of nothingness when the electric current sped through his nerves and strained and stiffened muscles taut against the straps. What did he care for physical pain? And the crime, the trial, the sentence to death, the long wait in the death house had almost vanished from his mind. So long ago they seemed. It was as if a different man had committed that act of murder on an impulse for which this man named Coningsby dragged out the last few minutes of his life. He had been a businessman, not imaginative, not abnormal, an ordinary citizen in every day before the event occurred, which was to transform him into a criminal. He had loved Polly sincerely, and he had thought her devoted to him. Even now he winced as he remembered the shock of the discovery that she loved another. Then a red mist had risen before his eyes, and he had killed the man whose name he searched for now in vain, for the numbing sense of death was already stealing through him. And he wondered idly whether man really was an immortal part, destined to survive the tribulations of life and look back on them with memory intact. Could there be heaven if the complete memory remained? But on the other hand, was not memory itself the test of survival? Then there had been the flight after the murder. He could remember hardly anything of that either, for it was one long nightmare of railroad journeys. How had he eluded the police who were posted awaiting him at every barrier? Oh yes, the disguise. He had forgotten that, as he seemed to have forgotten everything. Then had followed the dramatic betrayal by his dentist, Poulsen. Poulsen had fitted a gold tooth of a peculiar shape in the upper jaw. It was Poulsen who discovered him by one of those coincidences that always seemed to lie in wait for the criminal. Poulsen had betrayed him to the police. It had seemed the acme of irony that he should have to lose his life because of the chance recognition of a man whom he saw only twice a year, and a dentist. He remembered the trial with all his abominable publicity. He had hoped to escape with nominal sentence, but he refused his lawyer's suggestion that he should plead the unwritten law. His wife had been present in court. He remembered her cry when the judge finished the summing up. Then the stony faces of the jurymen who stared at him as they filed out their box, and the terrible waiting. If they're out an hour or longer, it will mean a disagreement, or at best a second-degree verdict, his counsel whispered hopefully. That was the first time that Coningsby realized the imminence of death. A second-degree verdict. Why? What had people been counting on? Suddenly he became aware that the faces of the spectators had death in them. There was death in the silence of the court, in the faces of the police, in the averted looks of the jurors as they came ominously back. Guilty of murder in the first degree. Those words rang through his brain. They seemed engraved there indelibly. Take it easily, the prison superintendent was saying. And Coningsby realized that while these memories had flitted through his brain, he had actually traversed those few paces across the stone flags from his cell into the death chamber. That was where he had expected his nerve to fail. The prison superintendent put some sweet-smelling and slightly pungent stuff to his nostrils, but he tried to push it away. He did not want to go to his death drugged. They were waiting for him, the reporters and all the ghoulish crew. There was the doctor fingering his stethoscope in an embarrassed manner, ready to apply it over his breast after he had ceased to breathe. And the electricians, pretending to be absorbed in his own ghastly preparations for sending down the lever which should force thousands of volts of electricity through his quivering body. Coningsby looked at the reporters. Their faces, singularly blank, stared impassively into his. He saw a young man moistening his dry lips furtively. He was already in the chair. He had sat down, still absorbed in his thoughts. Now it was all but over. The chaplain at his side would soon begin intoning the burial service. He knew just when the lever would fall. In the midst of life, we are in death. No word was spoken, but Coningsby knew that the dreadful drama had already begun. The electrodes were already applied. He felt the straps about him. He gripped the chair with both hands. He felt his eyeballs throbbing. He heard the droning of the clergyman beside him. He stared out under the bandages about his eyes. He saw the line of ghastly faces opposite him. The little reporter was wiping his forehead. Somebody pressed down the bandage again, but not before he had seen Polly's face among those of the assembled witnesses. His blood ran sluggishly, and icy needles seemed to prick his veins. Polly had come to see him die. The thought was maddening. His eyes had caught hers, and he had seen hers fixed on his with emotion, almost with fear. He tore the bandage from his eyes and struggled in the chair. He drew in a deep breath. The guards placed their hands on him and forced him down. He knew that the fatal current would not be sent through his body while their hands were about him. And clinging to them, he strove to raise while the droning went behind him. He fought like a madman. The scene dissolved in a red mist like that which had been before his eyes when he committed murder. All the while he saw Polly's face, the horror in her eyes. She started up. Or life. Take it easily now. It won't last a moment. He cursed the warden. He fought like a man possessed. Polly had risen and was coming toward him. We are in death. He felt the current course through his body. He ceased to struggle. His last thought was that it was too late. It didn't hurt you, did it? He was staring into Polson's face. The dentist was standing over him, his forceps in hand, and at his side was Polly. You nearly got my finger that last pull, said Polson. Anyway, that's a pretty interesting little article, isn't it? A little story about somebody going to the electric chair. And there's a lot of these types of execution stories in these newspapers, and I thought that one was particularly interesting. The way it was written in the description, I think that's fascinating stuff. Anyway, if you enjoyed this, please like the video and, of course, follow our channel. And I just want to remind you that all these videos on Headlines and Voices are sponsored by Audio Mover. Audio Mover is the company that takes your old audio and videotapes, your history, and converts it into digital and creates a permanent archive of your memories. And so we encourage you to go to Audio Mover, that's audiomover.com. We'll put a link in the description below, audiomover.com, and get your order started. And if you go in checkout at audiomover.com and type in the word headlines, you'll get 15% off your order. Anyway, thanks for watching. Headlines and Voices is sponsored by Audio Mover, the company that takes your history, your old audio and videotapes, and converts them into digital. Visit audiomover.com to learn more. Headlines and Voices is a production of Thick and Mystic Media. Visit thickandmystic.com.